All right, we'll see if this records. I actually have almost no memory on my phone because this is an old piece of crap. But TGIF, I hope you're enjoying your end of the week. And I have just left the parking lot and it is scorching here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some news from the past week. Now, on Wednesday, I tried to record a podcast concerning what happened with the gubernatorial recall in California, as well as the General Mark Milley scandal, which is unfolding at the time. It wasn't confirmed yet whether Milley had indeed spoken with his Chinese counterpart. So I think I'm not going to upload that version of the podcast because it's a little bit outdated. And I do like to keep my information current when I upload it, if I can help it, unlike other people that I've often clashed with. So, what's been going on, in addition to the topics already discussed, is that the United States continues to see its position in the world erode, largely because of an absence of leadership. And I hate to be completely political, but it's hard to stay objective today. It's hard to stay objective because true objectivity is almost impossible. But even if you could achieve true objectivity, nobody would believe you today because everybody looks at a source, looks at a commentator as being skewed by a personal bias. So I'll just say up front that I'd say that a lot of the views that I have based on current events that are happening right now with regards to Afghanistan, with regards to COVID, with regards to the political system and civil liberties, they're so colored by my own personal views that you could have people that would tune in and they'd have it fall on their deaf ears. But I think that offering a different perspective is important, as the range of viewpoints is narrowed in the media right now. You're seeing a lot of censorship being tamped down onto the social media sphere, that you need people to really offer a different perspective. And a couple of these stories that I'm going to talk about right now are a good example of this. So with Gavin Newsom winning in California and basically fending off a recall effort, I think that it's hard to see California having any different result in the near future. And I will say, if you are a Californian who is somebody who voted for rejecting the recall and for Gavin Newsom, I don't know what you're expecting him to do that will change the trajectory of the state. Almost all Californians would agree that California has horrible metrics on homelessness. They have horrible metrics on wildfires. They have horrible metrics on drug addiction and on crime. They have bad metrics on jobs and on the economy. And Gavin Newsom has overseen 4 of those, or I should say 3 of those years as the governor, another 8 years as the lieutenant governor under Jerry Brown at the time. And then before that, he was the mayor of San Francisco. And one thing that occurred last week, I think it was the beginning of last week, or it might have been this week, was that, and I didn't get to see the press conference, the actress Rose McGowan came out and declared that when she made her allegations against the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, that Gavin Newsom's wife, the First Lady of California, came towards her and set up a meeting, I guess. So she reached out by either phone or by email, set up a meeting, and Rose McGowan ended up almost going to the meeting and then leaving before actually attending. And then through a lawyer was communicated to her, a lawyer named David Boies, that, you know, what would it take to make her happy, as in, what would it take for her allegations against Weinstein to go away? Now, I have not seen any corroboration for this. I think that the insinuation was made through Dave Rubin, who, and also she eventually endorsed Larry Elder. So it could have been, notice, could have been just a political ploy, right? Because Rose McGowan is deeply embittered towards the Democratic Party, and she could have just been trying to sully the name of Gavin Newsom and his wife. But regardless of whether the information was true or not, there was largely a media blackout of it, and we know with hindsight that these allegations against Democratic politicians who have been, for whatever reason, accused of improper sexual behavior, they seem to have much different treatment from GOP politicians, and in some cases even politicians from the far left wing of the Democratic Party. I think this guy, I think his name was Saeed Buttar or something. He was running against Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco as a primary opponent. So I think his name was Shahid Buttar, come to think of it. But whatever his name was, sorry if I butchered it. No disrespect. These candidates, who are generally people who they have a disadvantage in terms of media coverage, and often a disadvantage in terms of funding, when a sexual allegation comes up against them, or anything relating to a sexual allegation, they immediately get the third degree from the media. You saw this happen with Shahid Buttar, if you're very, very savvy and you know about it. This was a left-wing candidate who was accused of making a woman feel uncomfortable, I think over a decade earlier, during some sort of yoga session, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. So this was used in order to torpedo his challenge to Nancy Pelosi. And make no mistake, I don't care if Shahid Buttar, if that's his name, has viewpoints that are diametrically opposed to mine. But the fact is that it was never substantiated, and once the primary was over, you never heard anything about it. And the same thing you could say regarding Roy Moore, who was a Senate candidate from Alabama. By the way, Roy Moore is a Republican and a far-right populist. And while I wouldn't say he's the devil, but I probably disagree with a lot of his viewpoints on church and state and things like that. But again, there were allegations against him of, I believe, sexual relations with a minor, I think it was a woman who was underage, that were stretching back from the early 1980s. There was never any substantiation of it. The allegation stood as an allegation, and that was enough for the people in the media to claim that, he is guilty until proven innocent. The same thing with Brett Kavanaugh, and the same thing, and you could go on and on and on, and all these Me Too allegations that happened. What was in the end the big reveal regarding Me Too and the related movement Time's Up, which is very deeply connected to it? And there's an organization that the people who are in charge of Time's Up actually helped to, a couple of them, I don't know if it was everyone, but a couple of them, Tina Chen and one of the attorneys that was at the head of the organization, they helped to cover up the allegations against Andrew Cuomo, and they were running interference in the media, trying to make it seem as if at least one of the accusers was not credible. And they blatantly went against their own credo regarding the need to believe victims of sexual assault, and decided, you know what, in this case, we don't have to believe them because the person that they're making allegations against, he has, desirable traits, let me put it that way, desirable traits in terms of his opinions, and that's the long and the short of it. If you have the correct opinions, the correct affiliations, the correct membership of the right club, then no, you are not accountable for instances of sexual assault. And this is something that should be weighing on the minds of everyone who is hoping for not just a government that works well, but a government where the people in power are not able to literally trample on all norms of society, right? And that's what Andrew Cuomo was alleged to have been doing. By the way, Andrew Cuomo fell from grace because of the sexual assault allegations. It took a long time for it to happen, but in reality, that was very mild compared to other allegations against him concerning the COVID-19 nursing home scandal, which we don't know if there's ever going to be accountability for that. It's largely been left up in the air, thanks to his resignation. So I think that Gavin Newsom winning the recall election, I think obviously you can't I'm not going to find a silver lining in it. I don't care whether there were allegations of electoral impropriety, because there's nothing you can do about it. At this point, California is basically a machine. It's a machine state. There's a political machine in power. They're not accountable to anyone, and the public doesn't care. So I don't even think if there was, let's say that there was some sort of manipulation. Well, even without the manipulation, I don't think that Governor Newsom would have been recalled, because you have, in my opinion, an electorate that, with exception to certain people who know that they've been cheated in terms of COVID policy and in terms of all the other relevant policies in California, whether they're economic, whether they're environmental, whether they're zoning. Most of those people living in California, they are basically, they don't care. They can keep getting kicked in the face, and they'll just open their mouth and ask for another one. Say that you missed a tooth or something. So I don't have much positive outlook for it, and there's not much that I can look at as some sort of sunshine over the horizon for it. The second topic that I wanted to discuss last time, that I'm going to move to this time, was Mark Milley and his actions regarding the launch of a nuclear strike on China. So, to be clear, it has been confirmed that the conversation took place. I do think, based on the last information that I have, there's still some conjecture over what was said and whether Milley indeed cut Donald Trump out of the chain of command by saying that any nuclear strike that is ordered must be approved by him. And it's yet to be seen whether Woodward's description of events was true. Bob Woodward is, of course, the Washington Post reporter who is, he's basically a legend, but some would say he is an inflated legend, that many of the things he says are actually not true. In fact, they're actually just matters of exaggeration or invention. But to continue, this issue with Mark Milley, it shows that the military itself is basically in some sort of it's, I would say, slow motion disintegration, but it's beyond slow motion at this point. When you have the person who's at the head of America's, actual armed services, who is behaving this way, taking it upon himself to do this, and allegedly going behind Trump's back and going to Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and giving her assurances of his actions and things like that. I would say that you could call this a military coup in some respects. It's not the most solid coup, but let me tell you a little story. A few years ago in Brazil, the president, Dilma Rousseff, was actually impeached and removed from office. And this was done constitutionally, by the book, by the Brazilian parliament. Not to say that politics in Brazil isn't corrupt, but Rousseff had pissed off everyone, pissed them off because she had been a complete failure. And it was clear that at a certain point, enough people, even from her own party, were going to vote to remove her from office, because Brazil was in an economic and constitutional crisis at the time. So what did the left, including The Guardian, including even people like Glenn Greenwald say? They called it a soft coup, even though when you really look at what happened in Brazil, you could say that there were some legal issues that might have complicated it. You could say, and there are people, and that would include Glenn Greenwald, who say that what happened was that this whole corruption investigation in Brazil was largely cooked up by a bunch of anti-left politicians and police officers and judicial appointments, judges and magistrates who wanted to get Rousseff and her predecessor and mentor Lula. But the fact of the matter is, as it happened, it's not as if the military removed Rousseff from office and put Lula in prison. It was entirely done through a constitutional process and a trial. And what happened was that the Brazilian justice system and the Brazilian parliament executed this in the constitutional manner. And whatever you want to say about the justness of the penalty, removal from office and imprisonment for corruption, it was done literally according to the way the Brazilian Constitution happens. And yet the left at the time, including many people who are on the moderate left, were looking at this as some sort of violation of the norms of democracy. And that's just not the case. But in this case, they don't see any reason to be alarmed. Many of them don't see. I mean, there are people, including, surprise, surprise, Alexander Vindman, of all people, who was involved in the bogus first impeachment of Donald Trump, so he is standing up and saying, no, Mark Milley, he crossed a line here. Well, many people on the left don't think that he crossed the line. I've seen several editorials from CNN and from other publications. I think I saw one from Rolling Stone, trying to justify Milley's actions by setting them in the context of a commander-in-chief who was out of control. But the reality is that what was happening with respect to Mark Milley and Donald Trump, it doesn't jibe with the circumstances that are being talked about. It's not as if Donald Trump was actively threatening to nuke China in his last days in office. And while there was a lot of chaotic motion regarding the recounts and the audits and Donald Trump's courtroom challenges to the election, the idea that he was going to react to this by nuking China, it's not supported by anything that's in the public record right now. There's almost no, I mean, we don't have any record of him ordering the American, nuclear commands, what is it, NORAD to prepare to nuke China or anything. So Mark Milley's actions with regards to this, they're inexplicable, and they seem to show that beyond just being a completely compromised political actor, right? He was, and this is something I blame Trump for, by the way. Trump is a person who appointed Mark Milley. It's Biden's fault that he's retained Mark Milley, and it's clear that Mark Milley has to be considered for court-martial. I don't think it has to be a consideration. I think he needs to be court-martialed, and I think that if you're in a senior position in the military today, at whatever level, and you're living through this, you should consider banding together with others and vowing to resign unless Mark Milley is put under court-martial, because when the fish rots from the head, they have this saying. I think it's a Russian saying. You can't have the person who is at the very top and living according to one standard and violating all the norms according to one standard and escaping consequences. And you did see this, by the way. This isn't just the military. It's the FBI with James Comey, who never was adequately dealt with. He violated the law. James Comey through his leaking of classified information to, I believe it was either the New York Times or the Washington Post through a personal friend. You see this through Andrew McCabe, who is Comey's deputy. And you see this through other members of the Justice Department like Sally Yates. You see this through James Clapper and his violation of, lying to Congress about the gathering of data private data from American citizens. So this whole pattern, it shows that the military is no better than everything else. Not that we should have expected it to have been much better, but these people, the more they behave this way and the more they shirk any accountability for it, the less confidence Americans are going to have in those institutions. So this brings me to another story from this week, another couple stories. So President Biden's approval numbers from this week, and these are according to polls that are in many cases are weighted in his favor, that they oversample Democrats. Right now, the rolling average from Real Clear Politics shows that he is at negative 4.5 percentage points in approval, which means that if it was unweighted, if it was basically weighted to reflect the real electorate, it could be that Joe Biden is less than 40% in approval, which would position him worse than Donald Trump at any point in his presidency. Now, of course, we can't make those assumptions, so negative 4.5 it is, even though it is based on their assumptions. The polling agencies assume that there's more Democrats in America and that those Democrats are more likely to vote. I think that they're setting themselves up for some real pain next year as polling agencies, because if election results reflect that the Democrats are less popular than the polls suggest, and there's plenty of data and evidence to show that it is, then many of these Democrats are going to be unprepared, or they might have internal polling that they're not releasing. And you could see, and this happened in 2010 with Obama, this happened in 2018 with Trump before their midterms. In both cases, you had incumbent members of the ruling party who decided that they're not going to run for re-election to Congress. And why is Biden so unpopular at this juncture, right? Well, besides the unemployment, which is driven in part due to the COVID fear-mongering, besides the horrible situation of the border, which is probably driving his numbers down, at least in the border states and the South, and in communities where there are large numbers of illegal aliens. And besides all of his bungling of the COVID crisis itself and Afghanistan, well, the truth is that Biden is also embarrassing America just in ways that should be much easier to avoid than some of the other problems that I discussed first. There was just this deal, okay, that was signed where the UK and Australia would buy submarines from the United States, and it was basically superseding a previous deal that I think Australia made with France for their submarine technology. And by doing this, yes, you could say that Biden was making strides to help the UK and Australia in their joint effort with the United States against China. But, and this is important here, it also throws shade at a different ally, which is the French government, who Biden, in some sense, he needs, right? You could say that, America has a very complex web of relationships with other countries. It's not easy to manage. And yes, there are countries that we have friendly relations with that are not friends with each other. Case in point, we have friendly relations with Greece, we have friendly relations with Turkey. So it's a difficult balancing act. In this case, the French were so offended by this action that they decided to cancel a gala dinner with Biden. Today, they were supposed to have it tonight at the White House in order to celebrate 240 years since, I think it's called the Battle of the Capes, which was a symbolic event in American and French history where the French aided the United States in its fight for independence against the British. So the French decided, you know what, you're going to piss on us, we're going to piss right back. So there's plenty of evidence that Macron was already very, angry at Biden over previous decisions. I think the previous issue was migration and Afghanistan and all of that. If President Biden really begins to alienate Macron and alienate the leaders of the EU and people like Merkel and people like, who's another good example? Draghi of Italy, who's not really that big of a player, and the actual EU leadership in Brussels, then it's a sign that the United States is actually really isolating itself in the world. And I mean this in a very literal sense. When Donald Trump was president, there was all of this noise and just ridiculous whining about how America was disappearing from the world stage in terms of leadership, and we are basically mocked by the world and everything. And what in reality happened? Well, Donald Trump was able to renegotiate NAFTA. He was able to renegotiate the member contributions to NATO. He was able to basically withdraw a lot of troops from the Middle East. Unfortunately, he stationed some of them in Germany, but I believe at the end of his term, he also withdrew a lot of them from Germany. And he was also able to have some breakthroughs, which I think are now wiped out by Biden, in regards to Korea. He also had the Abraham Accords, which were between Israel and a number of Middle Eastern countries, which were, they were a breakthrough. And now there's talk that is stalling, right? There may not be any more progress on that for the time being, as long as Biden is president, because Biden is reprioritizing the Israel-Palestine negotiation ahead of negotiating normalization of ties between Israel and the Arab states. So basically what we're seeing is that in example after example, whether it is all of the stuff that I mentioned before, or throw in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which basically tightens ties not between America and Germany, but between Germany and Russia, or the withdrawal from Afghanistan, or you could pick any example from either the above, or you could put your own in the comments. Donald Trump was miles and miles and miles above, he was maybe light years ahead of Biden in terms of his performance on foreign policy. And it's not to say, look, Donald Trump was a very imperfect leader with a very imperfect policy. There were things he did that I deeply disagreed with. The tight ties with Saudi Arabia, and there was a lot of talk about actively intervening in South America. There were things that I think he did, and also the strikes in Syria I disagreed with. So, look, I'm not trying to paint a picture of perfection, but there is certainly a heavy contrast between what the former president did, right, which was flawed, and what the current president is doing, which is completely deficient and, could be said to permanently harm American foreign policy in our lifetime. And, there are days when I look at the news and I say, the more information I take in, the less hope I have for America, the less hope I have for the future of the world, and the less hope I have for my family and the people around me because of what I see happening. And I'm not the only person, okay? So I think that if you're listening to me, you probably agree. And if you disagree with me, I'd like to know what positive signs there are there. Now, the last issue, which is not entirely unconnected to the issue with Biden and his popularity and his foreign policy failures, is what's going on with the midterm in 2022. So, if you do not know, I live in the state of Ohio. There's a congressman in Ohio who lives in a district that's a little further away from me named Anthony Gonzalez, and he's said, and this is a Republican guy, he is not going to run for office next year. And is this bad news for the Republican Party? Well, the truth is, if you look at what's happened and why he retired, it's probably great news for the Republicans, at least in terms of the populist wing of the Republican Party. Anthony Gonzalez was one of the 10 Republican members of the House that voted to impeach Donald Trump during the second impeachment that happened when he'd already left office. And I think that he believed that with due time and given enough, given enough space for Americans to process the end of the Trump era, people would forget his position on this, and they would see that, well, this is a guy who can at least, he can reach across the aisle with the Democrats, but he can at least represent some of their own individual preferences with regards to taxes, with regards to other policies, with regard and with regards to manufacturing. And the truth of the matter is that since he's left office, a lot of Democrats have, Democrats in the comment sections of his posts have supported Anthony Gonzalez and said how much courage he has and how Ohio is so lucky to have one Republican who's actually honest and everything. But the reality is that if you look beyond social media, if you look at the actual landscape of Ohio, this is actually a state where the voters are moving way farther to the right than the political leadership. And it's both encouraging, but it's also worrying, because I do think that at a certain point, we do need a little bit of a, I guess a coherent policy here in the state. But we have a governor here, Governor DeWine, who insists that he will play the middle ground between his voters and President Biden by not really taking a coherent position on anything. So he's not opposing mask mandates. He's not opposing, the reason that we don't have mask mandates here is because he was stripped of the power to impose one. He's also not imposing, he's not opposed to vaccine mandates. And Ohioans, by and large, have rejected these. And you're seeing a lot of people, especially in places like Akron, that are not red areas, who are rejecting these because, yeah, these are areas with large minority populations. And as you know, there's big vaccine hesitancy in these communities for understandable reasons. So Anthony Gonzalez, he tried to also walk this middle line, and he's basically gone. He's decided, and this is probably due to both internal polling and data from campaign finance websites. It's probably a good guess that Anthony Gonzalez realized that his Republican primary opponent would likely destroy him. And in the actual general election, so here in Ohio, the primary election, I believe, happens in either May or April. I don't remember which one. I probably should know, but I don't. But in any case, if the primary, yeah, he would have lost. And by the time the actual general election would roll around, whoever was initially a supporter of Anthony Gonzalez would have probably just voted Republican anyway. They're not likely to have voted Democrat because they were so in love with Anthony Gonzalez. Because the truth is that a lot of the never Trump or the used to be Trump Republicans, Anthony Gonzalez, by the way, never spoke out against Trump during his 4 years of office. He was mostly pretending to be, on the boat with Trump and saying, oh, yes, I support what the president says. Suddenly, when this whole January 6th thing happened, he changed his tune, likely because he hoped to get, good earmarks from Nancy Pelosi in the House and be able to work well with Pelosi. So for his own narrow interest with regards to legislation, that was probably his motivation. But as we see, people don't really, they don't get drawn to that type of politics anymore. To be a real leader in America now, you can't just be someone who is, you know, walking single file with the rest of the politicians into the same room and, you know, raising your hand to vote yes or no on something. You have to have a consistent vision. And that's something that, whether you like that vision or not, Donald Trump had. It's also something that Bernie Sanders had, which I don't think he still has. But a lot of people remain loyal to Bernie Sanders because he has a consistent vision. But it's not something that people like Anthony Gonzalez has. And what they do instead is they crow about January 6th and about how it's a danger to democracy and everything. That's not what draws people to vote for you. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can also find me on BitChute and on Rumble and Odyssey if you want to join my alternative media channels, and on Gab and Minds if you want to just chat or support me on Subscribestar. Subscribe to the new newsletter below. It's in the description. And I also have a Telegram channel that's in the description if you want to join that. And have a great day.